The whispers started the day Adelaide Garner turned 18, when her father's will was read, and the town learned she had inherited nothing but debts and a dilapidated cabin that could barely withstand a strong wind. Adelaide stood in the lawyer's stuffy office that September afternoon in 1872, her worn cotton dress pressed carefully despite the frayed hem, her dark blonde hair pinned back in a simple bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. She had known her father drank away most of what they had, but hearing the extent of it spoken aloud in Mr. Pritchard's monotone voice made her stomach clench. Around her, the good people of Oroville, California whispered behind gloved hands and fans, their eyes sliding over her with pity and something worse, relief that it was not their daughter standing there with nothing. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson murmured to Mrs. Walsh, not bothering to lower her voice much. "No dowry, no family, not even pretty enough to catch a husband on looks alone. What prospects does a girl like that have?" Adelaide kept her chin up and her hands clasped tight enough that her knuckles went white. She had heard worse in the 6 days since her father had been found face down in the creek, drowned in 2 feet of water and his own stupidity. The town had been generous with their judgments and stingy with their charity. When the reading concluded, Adelaide walked out into the dusty street where the late afternoon sun painted the Sierra Nevada foothills in shades of gold and amber. Oroville sprawled along the Feather River, a town that had swelled during the gold rush and now clung to life through logging, farming, and the stubborn determination of those who had nowhere else to go. She belonged to that last category now. The cabin her father left her sat at the eastern edge of town, a 20-minute walk that took her past the neat homes of respectable families, past the general store where she had worked until yesterday when Mr. Chen gently told her he could not afford to keep her on, past the church where her father would be buried tomorrow in the paupers section. By the time she reached the sagging structure that was now her entire inheritance, the sun had dipped behind the mountains and shadows stretched long across the overgrown yard. Inside, the cabin was worse than she remembered. Her father had let everything go in the years since her mother died. The roof leaked in 3 places, the floorboards were rotted through in spots, and the whole structure tilted slightly to the left as if tired of standing upright. Adelaide set down her small bag and surveyed the wreckage of her life with dry eyes. She had cried herself empty in the private hours of the past week. Now there was only the practical matter of survival. She had $17 to her name, no prospects for employment, and winter coming on fast. The town's judgment rang in her ears, but beneath it, Adelaide felt something harder forming in her chest. They thought she had no future. They thought she would either starve or be forced to accept charity or worse. She would prove them wrong, though she had no idea how. That night, she lay on the narrow bed that had been hers since childhood and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Somewhere in the hills, a mountain lion screamed. Closer, she could hear the rustle of mice in the walls. This was her kingdom now, this falling-down shack and the debts attached to it. Adelaide closed her eyes and made herself a promise. Whatever it took, she would survive. She would build something from nothing, and she would do it alone because that was all she had ever truly been. The next morning, she woke before dawn and began taking inventory. The cabin might be falling apart, but there were things of value if she looked hard enough. Her mother's old sewing kit, still good. A set of carpenter's tools her father had never sold, probably because he had been too drunk to remember he owned them. A cast iron stove that worked despite its age. Adelaide made a list in the small notebook she had kept for years, filling it with numbers and plans. By the time the sun was fully up, she had a strategy. She would take in mending and sewing to start. She would fix what she could of the cabin herself, learning as she went. She would plant a winter garden with whatever seeds she could beg or barter. It was not much of a plan, but it was hers. The funeral was a sparse affair. A dozen people came, mostly out of obligation to a man they had known for 30 years, and they left as quickly as propriety allowed. Adelaide stood by the grave in her black dress, borrowed from the church charity box, and felt nothing but relief that it was over. Whatever her father had been in his youth, he had become someone small and mean and broken. She would not follow that path. As the last mourners drifted away, Adelaide noticed a man standing apart from the others, half hidden by a large oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a full beard that could not hide the strong line of his jaw. He wore buckskin and canvas, clothes made for hard use in the mountains, and he stood with the stillness of someone comfortable with silence and solitude. Even from a distance, Adelaide could see the breadth of his shoulders, the thick muscles of his arms crossed over his chest, the way he seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains themselves. Their eyes met across the graveyard. His were pale blue, startling in his sun-darkened face, and they held something she could not name. Not pity, which she would have hated. Not judgment, which she had learned to expect. Something else, something that made her breath catch before she looked away. When she glanced back, he was gone. Adelaide walked home through town, aware of eyes on her, of whispers that followed like the dust kicked up by passing wagons. At the general store, she stopped to ask Mr. Chen if he knew of anyone needing sewing done. The older man looked at her with kind eyes. "I ask around, Miss Adelaide." "You do good work. Someone need you." It was more encouragement than she had received from anyone else, and she thanked him sincerely before continuing on. As she passed the boarding house, she heard Mrs. Walsh holding court on the front porch. "Mark my words, that girl will be in desperate straits before the first snow. No family, no skills worth mentioning, and too proud to accept help. She will end up like her father or worse." "Someone should speak to Reverend Mills," another woman added. "Perhaps he can convince her to go to her mother's people in San Francisco." "Her mother was disowned for marrying that drunk," Mrs. Walsh said with authority. "They will not take her. No, that girl has no prospects at all. It is quite tragic, really." Adelaide forced herself to keep walking, her spine straight and her face composed. Let them talk. Their words could not hurt her any more than the truth already did. She had no prospects by their measure, no path forward that they could see. But she had herself, and that would have to be enough. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work. Adelaide attacked the cabin's problems with fierce determination. Patching the roof with old boards she scavenged from an abandoned mine building, replacing the worst of the floorboards, scrubbing years of grime from every surface. Her hands blistered and bled, then calloused. Her back ached from unfamiliar labor. But slowly, the cabin began to look less like a ruin and more like a home. The sewing work came in trickles. Mrs. Chen brought her some mending, paying more than it was worth with quiet dignity. A few other families followed, enough to buy flour and beans, enough to keep the desperation at bay for another week. Adelaide worked by candlelight late into each night, her stitches small and perfect, determined that no one would find fault with her craftsmanship. On a cold October morning, Adelaide was on the roof trying to secure a loose shingle when she heard a wagon coming up the rutted path to her cabin. She climbed down carefully, wiping her dirty hands on her apron, and found a man sitting atop a loaded wagon. Not just any man, she realized with a start. The same man she had seen at her father's funeral. Up close, he was even more imposing. easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up despite the chill, were corded with muscle, his hands large and scarred from hard use. He sat with easy confidence, completely comfortable in his skin and strength. His dark hair was tied back with a leather cord, and those startling blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "Miss Garner," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "My name is Owen Jameson. I have a proposition for you." Adelaide crossed her arms, defensive despite herself. "I am not interested in propositions, Mr. Jameson." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Nothing improper, madam. I need someone who can sew and cook and keep a camp in order. I trap and hunt in the high country, and I could use help preparing my winter supplies. It would be hard work, but I pay fair wages. $3 a week, plus I would help fix up this place properly. You would need it sound before the real cold sets in." $3 a week was more than she could make in a month of mending. Adelaide searched his face for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but his expression remained steady and open. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "You do not know me." "I knew your mother," Owen said quietly. "Years back, before she married. She was kind to a young fool who did not know his head from a hole in the ground. I heard about your situation, and I figured you could use honest work. That is all this is, Miss Garner. Honest work if you want it." Adelaide considered. Every instinct screamed that this was too good to be true, that there must be a catch. But she was also practical enough to know she could not afford pride. Winter was coming, and her $17 had dwindled to $9 despite her best efforts. "What sort of work exactly?" she asked. Owen climbed down from the wagon with the kind of graceful strength that came from a life of physical labor. "I bring in hides and meat from my trap lines. They need to be processed, preserved, packed for sale. I need winter clothes mended and new ones made. I need someone who can cook decent meals and keep the supplies organized. It is not easy work, and it is not particularly pleasant, but it is necessary. And you would help with the cabin." "I would make sure it is sound," he said, looking up at the sagging roof. "That is part of the deal. Cannot have my employee freezing to death or getting crushed when this place collapses." Despite everything, Adelaide felt a smile tug at her lips. "You are very direct, Mr. Jameson." "Life is too short for dancing around the truth," he replied. "What do you say, Miss Garner? Do we have an agreement?" Adelaide thought of Mrs. Walsh's prediction, of the town's certainty that she had no prospects. She thought of her dwindling savings and the long winter ahead. Then she thought of her mother, who had once been kind to a young fool, and she made her decision. "We have an agreement," she said, extending her hand. "When do I start?" Owen's large hand engulfed hers, his grip firm but careful. "Right now, if you are willing. I need to get supplies from town, and then we will head up to my camp. It is about an hour's ride into the foothills." 2 hours later, Adelaide found herself riding in Owen's wagon into the Sierra Nevada foothills, leaving Oroville and its whispers behind. The wagon was loaded with supplies from the general store, and Adelaide had packed what few possessions she needed into a small trunk. The cabin was locked up, though there was little inside worth stealing. The road, such as it was, wound through groves of oak and pine, climbing steadily into country that was wild and beautiful. Owen drove in comfortable silence, only speaking to point out landmarks or warn her about a particularly rough section of road. Adelaide studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to understand this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not quite prayed. He was older than her, she guessed around 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from years in the elements. But there was nothing hard or cruel in his features. His mouth, when she could see it through his beard, had a generous curve. His hands on the reins were steady and competent. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability, but also of a certain gentleness, a care in how he moved and spoke that suggested he was conscious of his size and power. "You are wondering if this is a mistake," Owen said suddenly, not looking at her. Adelaide considered lying, then decided to match his directness. "I am wondering why a man who lives alone in the mountains needs help now, after presumably managing on his own for years. Fair question." Owen guided the wagon around a fallen branch. "Truth is, I am expanding my operation. I have been working the trap lines for near about 12 years, doing well enough. But there is opportunity to do better if I can process more hides, if I can spend more time actually trapping and less time on the other work. I could hire a man, but most of the men around here want to work the lumber camps or try their luck panning for gold. I need someone reliable, someone who will not drink up their wages or cause trouble. Your mother trusted you with all the household work from when you were small, or so I heard. Figured you would have the skills I needed. You have made inquiries about me." "I have." He did not sound apologetic. "Would you prefer I hired someone without checking their character first?" Adelaide had to concede the point. "How did you know my mother?" Owen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had gone softer. "I came through Oroville when I was about 18, green as grass and thinking I would make my fortune in the gold fields. Your mother was working at the boarding house then, before she married. I got sick with a fever, bad enough that I was out of my head for near a week. She looked after me, brought me food and medicine, never asked for anything in return. When I recovered, I tried to pay her, but she would not take it, said to pass the kindness on when I could. I have thought about that over the years, and when I heard about your situation, it seemed like maybe this was my chance to make good on that old debt." The story explained much, though Adelaide sensed there was more he was not saying. "You have been planning this for a while, then?" "Since I heard about your father passing," Owen admitted. "I would have come sooner, but I wanted to give you time to grieve, and I wanted to make sure the offer was one you could accept without feeling obligated or ashamed." Adelaide looked at him with new eyes. This was not a man acting on impulse or charity. This was someone who had thought carefully about how to help without giving offense, who understood pride and independence. It made her trust him more, even as it raised new questions. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for thinking of me that way." Owen just nodded, and they rode on in silence that felt less uncertain than before. The camp, when they reached it, was more substantial than Adelaide had expected. Owen had built a large cabin in a clearing beside a fast-running creek, with a separate structure for storing furs and supplies. The main cabin was solidly constructed, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, it was one large room with a sleeping loft, a work area, and a kitchen space with a good iron stove. Everything was neat and organized if dusty from disuse. "I have been staying up in a lined shack while I work the high country," Owen explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "But I come back here to process the furs and resupply. You will stay here in the main cabin. I will use the storage building when I am in camp." Adelaide looked at the cabin, then at Owen. "That is not right. This is your home. I can sleep in the storage building." "The storage building has no stove and half the furs I have collected this month," Owen said firmly. "You will stay in the main cabin where it is warm and safe." "This is not negotiable, Miss Garner." There was steel under the gentle tone, and Adelaide recognized when to stop arguing. "Very well, but I insist on cooking for both of us and keeping both buildings clean. If I am taking your home, the least I can do is make sure you are comfortable when you are here." Owen looked like he might argue, then nodded. "Fair enough. Now let me show you where everything is, and then we will get to work. I have about 60 hides that need to be scraped and stretched, and more coming in daily. The work was every bit as hard as Owen had warned. Adelaide had never processed animal hides before, and the first day left her arms shaking and her stomach queasy from the smell. But Owen was a patient teacher, showing her the proper way to scrape the skins clean, how to stretch them on frames for drying, how to treat them with the mixture of brains and oils that would keep the leather soft. He worked alongside her, his powerful arms making quick work of tasks that took her twice as long, but he never made her feel slow or incompetent. "You are doing well," he said that first evening as they cleaned up. "Better than most would on their first day." Adelaide looked at her reddened, aching hands. "I feel useless. You are learning. That is different." Owen pumped water for them to wash. "Give it a week and this will feel natural. Give it a month and you will be twice as fast as you are now." He was right, Adelaide discovered. By the end of the first week, her hands had toughened and her movements had become more efficient. She learned the rhythm of the work, the way to position the hide and angle the scraper for maximum effect. Owen brought in more furs each day, checking his trap lines before dawn and returning by mid-morning to work alongside her. In the evenings, Adelaide cooked meals from the supplies Owen had brought, simple fare of venison and beans and biscuits, but filling and hot. They ate together at the rough table Owen had built, talking about the day's work, about the animals Owen had seen on his rounds, about the weather and the coming winter. Owen was not a chatty man, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful and genuine. Adelaide found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations, to the way his face softened when he talked about the mountains he loved, to the rare smile that transformed his stern features into something warm and boyish. On the 10th day, Owen announced he needed to go into town for more supplies and to deliver some of the processed furs to the trader who would ship them to San Francisco. "Would you like to come?" he asked. "Or would you rather stay here and rest? You have been working hard." Adelaide thought about facing the town again, about the whispers and judgments. Then she thought about hiding like she had something to be ashamed of, and her chin came up. "I will come," she said. "I should check on the cabin anyway." They loaded the wagon with carefully wrapped bundles of furs and set out in the early morning light. The ride down was pleasant, the October air crisp and clear, the leaves on the oaks turning gold and red. Owen pointed out the places where he set his trap lines, the meadows where deer gathered, the rocky outcrop where a golden eagle nested. He spoke about the land with the reverence of someone who truly saw and appreciated it, and Adelaide found herself seeing it through his eyes, understanding why he had chosen this solitary life. When they reached Oroville, Owen drove straight to the trading post, where a grizzled man named Silas examined the furs with a critical eye before nodding approval. "Good quality, Owen. You always bring in good quality. I will give you the usual rate." While they conducted business, Adelaide slipped out to walk to her cabin. It stood as she had left it, forlorn but still standing. She checked the interior, relieved to find no new damage, no signs of intrusion. It was strange to think she had lived here her whole life, and yet after less than 2 weeks away, it already felt like it belonged to another person's past. "Adelaide Garner, as I live and breathe." Adelaide turned to find Mrs. Walsh bearing down on her, flanked by 2 other women from the church society. Their eyes were avid with curiosity and judgment. "We heard you had gone off into the mountains with that wild man Owen Jameson," Mrs. Walsh said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We have been so worried about you, dear. A young woman alone with a man like that, it is simply not proper." Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. Mr. Jameson has employed me to help with his business. It is honest work and I am well compensated." "I am sure you are," one of the other women said with a knowing smirk. "But what will people think? You have put yourself in a most compromising position." "People will think what they always think," Adelaide said, her patience fraying. "That I have no prospects and no future. But I am earning my own way and harming no one. That should be enough." "You were such a sweet child," Mrs. Walsh said, shaking her head. "What would your poor mother say?" "My mother would say that an honest day's work is nothing to be ashamed of," Adelaide replied. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have things to do." She brushed past them, her heart pounding with anger and humiliation. Behind her, she could hear them whispering, their voices carrying clearly. "She has ruined herself completely. No decent man will have her now. She never had prospects anyway. At least this way she is earning her keep, however she manages it." Adelaide's vision blurred with angry tears, but she refused to let them fall. She walked quickly back toward the trading post, nearly colliding with Owen as he came around the corner. His eyes went immediately to her face, reading her distress with unsettling accuracy. "What happened?" "Nothing, just the usual gossip." Adelaide tried to step around him, but Owen did not move. "What did they say?" His voice had gone quiet and dangerous. "It does not matter. It matters to me." Owen's jaw was tight under his beard. "Did they insult you?" Adelaide looked up at him, at the genuine anger on her behalf burning in his blue eyes, and something in her chest cracked open. "They think I have compromised myself by working for you. They think I have no prospects and that I am earning my keep through improper means." For a moment, Owen's face went absolutely still, and Adelaide saw the full force of his fury, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Then he took a breath and let it out slowly. "Wait here," he said. "Owen, no, it is not worth it." But he was already walking toward where Mrs. Walsh and her companions were still clustered near the cabin. Adelaide hurried after him, arriving in time to hear him address the women in a voice that carried across the street. "Mrs. Walsh, ladies, I understand you have been spreading lies about Miss Garner and about the nature of her employment." Mrs. Walsh drew herself up indignantly. "Mr. Jameson, I am sure I do not know what you mean." "I mean," Owen said with deliberate precision, "that you have been suggesting there is something improper in my employing Miss Garner to process furs and manage camp supplies. You have been suggesting that her character is somehow suspect because she has chosen honest work over charity or starvation." A small crowd was gathering, drawn by the confrontation. Adelaide wanted to sink into the ground, but Owen continued relentlessly. "Let me be clear, so there is no misunderstanding. Miss Garner is employed by me in a strictly professional capacity. She works hard, she is skilled, and she is paid fair wages for fair work. Any suggestion otherwise is a lie, and I will not tolerate lies about her character or mine. If I hear any more gossip, any more insinuations, I will know exactly where they started and I will take it very personally. Do I make myself clear?" Mrs. Walsh had gone pale, then red. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner?" "I dare because you have attacked the reputation of a woman under my protection," Owen said, his voice like iron. "You have judged her for the sin of surviving, of refusing to be crushed by circumstances beyond her control. That says far more about your character than it does about hers." He turned to the gathered crowd, most of whom Adelaide recognized from church or the general store. "Miss Garner is a respectable woman doing respectable work. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me, and I promise you, that is not a conversation you will enjoy." With that, Owen turned and walked back to Adelaide, his hand gentle on her elbow as he guided her toward the wagon. Adelaide was shaking, caught between mortification and something that might have been gratitude. "You should not have done that," she said when they were out of earshot. "You have made things worse." "No," Owen said firmly. "I have made things clear. Those women were going to talk no matter what. At least now they know there will be consequences. And everyone else heard the truth from me directly. Your reputation is intact." "My reputation was ruined the day my father died with nothing to his name." Owen stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Your reputation is exactly what you make of it, Adelaide, not what they say about you. What you actually are, what you actually do. And what you are is a strong, capable woman who refuses to give up. That is not nothing. That is everything." Adelaide stared at him, struck by the conviction in his voice, by the way he said her name like it meant something important. In that moment, standing in the dusty street with half the town watching, she felt something shift inside her. This man, this near stranger, saw her more clearly than anyone in this town ever had. He saw her struggling and did not pity her. He saw her working and did not judge her. He simply saw her, Adelaide, as she actually was. "Thank you," she said softly, "for defending me." Owen's expression gentled. "You do not need to thank me for telling the truth. Now let us get out of this town before I say something I will regret to someone who deserves it." They drove back to the mountain camp in contemplative silence. Adelaide replayed the confrontation in her mind, remembering the way Owen had stood up for her without hesitation, the way his fury on her behalf had been both terrifying and oddly thrilling. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever thought her worth defending. That night, after supper, they sat by the fire in the main cabin. Owen was working on repairing a trap while Adelaide mended one of his shirts, the companionable silence broken only by the crackle of the flames and the occasional pop of sap in the wood. "Can I ask you something?" Adelaide said finally. Owen looked up from his work. "Of course. Why do you live up here alone? You could have a comfortable life in town with your skills. You could have a family, a normal life." Owen considered the question for a long moment. "I tried normal once. I spent a few years working in the lumber camps, living in Sacramento, doing what was expected. But I never felt like I fit. The noise, the crowds, the constant need to be something other than what I was. Up here, I can be myself. I can work hard and live simply and not have to explain myself to anyone. It gets lonely sometimes, but it is honest, and I have never been good at pretending." Adelaide understood that in a way she had not expected. "I have spent my whole life in that town, and I never felt like I fit either. Everyone had their place, their role, their expectations. I was the drunk's daughter, the poor girl, the one to be pitied. Nothing I did could change that." "You are not there anymore," Owen pointed out gently. "No," Adelaide agreed, looking around the warm cabin. "I am not." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost like contentment. Adelaide and Owen worked side by side during the days, processing the steady stream of furs Owen brought in. Adelaide learned to identify different pelts by touch and smell, learned which ones would fetch the best prices and how to prepare them to maximize their value. She learned to cook over an open fire when they worked outside, to predict weather by the behavior of the animals and the smell of the wind, to navigate the forest trails that led to Owen's various trap lines. Owen taught her all of this with patient thoroughness, and in return, Adelaide organized his chaotic supply system, made his camp more efficient, and cooked meals that were far better than the hardtack and jerky he had been surviving on. She sewed him new shirts and repaired his worn canvas trousers, waterproofed his boots with rendered fat, and made sure he had warm clothes for the increasingly cold nights. They talked while they worked, sharing stories from their different lives. Owen told her about growing up in Oregon, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 15, about drifting south and finding his way to these mountains that had become his home. Adelaide told him about her mother's quiet strength, about the slow decline of her father, about the dreams she had harbored as a girl of seeing more of the world than just Oroville. "You still could," Owen said one afternoon as they stretched a particularly fine beaver pelt. "See the world, I mean. You are young, you have time." Adelaide laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "On what funds? With what prospects? No, I think my traveling days were over before they began. But this is not such a bad place to be. These mountains are beautiful." Owen looked at her across the stretching frame, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "They are," he agreed. "More beautiful than I realized." Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked down at her work, her heart beating faster. There had been moments like this over the past weeks, moments when their eyes met and held just a bit too long, when Owen's hand brushed hers and neither of them pulled away immediately, when the silence between them felt charged with something unspoken. Adelaide had been trying not to examine these moments too closely, afraid of what they might mean, afraid of hoping for something that could not be. That evening, as November settled over the mountains with cold determination, Owen returned from checking his lines earlier than usual. Adelaide was inside preparing supper, and she looked up in surprise when he came through the door. "Is something wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Snow coming," Owen said, moving to warm his hands by the stove. "Big storm, probably by tomorrow night. I need to bring in extra firewood and make sure the buildings are secure. We might be stuck here for a few days once it hits." They worked together as the light faded, stacking wood under the overhang of the cabin, checking that the shutters were sound, bringing in extra water from the creek. Owen moved with efficient purpose, and Adelaide matched his pace, understanding without being told what needed to be done. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen and the temperature had dropped sharply. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. They ate a quick supper, then Owen stood and reached for his coat. "I will bed down in the storage building," he said. Adelaide looked at the windows where the wind was already rattling the panes. "You will freeze. That building has no heat." "I will be fine. I have good blankets, Owen." Adelaide stood to face him. "This is foolish. There is a perfectly good loft upstairs. You can sleep there and I will stay down here by the stove. We are both adults. We can manage propriety for a few nights." Owen hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and concern for her reputation. "Adelaide, if anyone found out." "Who is going to find out?" "The bears. The mountain lions. We are alone up here, and you have already made it clear to the whole town that our arrangement is strictly professional. I am not going to let you freeze to death to preserve the appearance of propriety that no one is here to observe anyway." Finally, Owen nodded. "Just until the storm passes." The storm hit with full force the next afternoon. Snow fell thick and fast, driven by winds that howled around the cabin and piled drifts against the walls. Adelaide had never experienced a mountain storm like this. In town, snow was occasional and rarely heavy. This was different, wild and powerful and beautiful in its ferocity. Owen kept the fire going steadily, making sure they stayed warm and dry. They worked on indoor tasks, Adelaide sewing while Owen repaired equipment and organized his trapping supplies. As night fell and the storm intensified, they made supper together in the small kitchen space, moving around each other with the ease of long practice. After the meal, they sat by the fire, and Owen pulled out a battered book. "Do you like poetry?" he asked. Adelaide looked at him in surprise. "I do, though I have not read much. We could not afford books." "My mother loved poetry," Owen said, running his hand over the worn cover. "This was hers. I have read it so many times I have half of it memorized. Would you like to hear some?" In answer, Adelaide settled more comfortably in her chair, and Owen began to read. His deep voice gave the words weight and music, and Adelaide closed her eyes to listen. He read Wordsworth and Byron, Whitman and Emerson, poems about nature and freedom and the human heart. When he finished, the fire had burned low and snow was still falling heavily outside. "That was beautiful," Adelaide said softly. "Your mother had good taste." "She was a good woman," Owen replied. "Kind and strong, a lot like yours, I think. I wish they could have known each other." "I think they did, in a way. Kindness recognizes kindness." Adelaide looked at Owen, at his strong profile in the firelight, and felt her heart twist with an emotion she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with this gentle mountain man, with his quiet strength and his thoughtful nature, with the way he treated her like an equal partner rather than a charity case or a burden. It was foolish and hopeless, and completely beyond her control. "I should sleep," she said abruptly, standing. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Owen looked up at her, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been disappointment. "Sleep well, Adelaide. You too, Owen." She banked the fire and wrapped herself in her blankets on the lower bed, listening to Owen climb the ladder to the loft. She heard him settle, heard the creak of the ropes under his weight, and then everything was quiet except for the wind and the snow and her own racing thoughts. Sleep was a long time coming. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them in the cabin with nothing but each other for company. They talked more than they had in all the previous weeks combined, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Adelaide learned that Owen had once loved a girl in Sacramento, but she had wanted a life he could not give her, wanted parties and society and things that felt like chains around his neck. He had let her go and retreated to the mountains, nursing his broken heart in solitude until the pain faded to a dull ache and then to nothing. "You still love her?" Adelaide asked on the 3rd day as they worked together preparing a venison stew. "No," Owen said without hesitation. "I have not thought about her in years. What we had was not really love, I think. It was more the idea of love, the wanting to feel something. She deserves better than that, and so did I. And you never found anyone else." Owen looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her hands still on the knife she was using to chop carrots. "I never looked. I figured I was meant to be alone, that it was easier that way. No disappointments, no compromises, no pretending to be someone I was not. And now—" Adelaide hardly dared breathe as she asked it. "Now," Owen said slowly, "I am not so sure. Sometimes being alone feels more like loneliness than freedom." Before Adelaide could respond, there was a tremendous crack from outside. They both rushed to the window to see that a large pine tree had split under the weight of the snow, half of it crashing down dangerously close to the storage building. "Damn," Owen muttered. "I need to clear that before the rest of it comes down." "Not in this storm," Adelaide protested. "It is too dangerous." "It will be more dangerous if it falls on the building and destroys half my winter's work," Owen countered, already reaching for his coat. "I will just cut it away from the building and secure it. I will be fine." Adelaide wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face. "I am coming with you then, Adelaide. You need someone to hold the lantern and watch for widow makers. I am coming." They bundled up and ventured out into the storm. The wind tried to steal Adelaide's breath, and the snow was so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Owen moved purposefully toward the fallen tree, and Adelaide followed, holding the lantern high. Owen worked quickly with his axe, cutting away the branches that threatened the building and securing the trunk so it would not roll. Adelaide watched nervously, holding the light steady and scanning the trees above for other hazards. They were nearly finished when Owen's foot slipped on the ice-covered log. He fell hard, and Adelaide heard his sharp intake of breath. "Owen," she set down the lantern and hurried to his side. "Are you hurt?" "Just twisted my ankle," he said through gritted teeth, trying to stand. His face went white, and he sat back down abruptly. "Maybe more than twisted." Adelaide got her shoulder under his arm and helped him stand, taking as much of his weight as she could. He was heavy with muscle and height, but adrenaline gave her strength. Together, they made their slow, painful way back to the cabin, Owen leaning heavily on her and trying not to put weight on his injured ankle. Inside, Adelaide helped him to the bed by the fire and knelt to remove his boot carefully. The ankle was already swelling, angry and hot to the touch. She pressed gently around the joint, and Owen hissed in pain. "I do not think it is broken," Adelaide said, "but it is a bad sprain. You need to stay off it completely for at least a few days." "I need to check the trap lines," Owen protested, "and we need more wood brought in." "The trap lines can wait, and I can bring in wood." Adelaide stood and fetched clean cloth and snow from just outside the door. She packed the snow around his ankle to bring down the swelling, then wrapped it snugly. "You are going to rest and let this heal properly, even if I have to tie you to the bed." Despite his pain, Owen's mouth twitched. "You think you could?" "I am a very determined woman, Owen Jameson. Do not test me." For the next week, their roles reversed. Adelaide took over all the physical labor, bringing in firewood, checking that the buildings were secure, even venturing out to the nearest trap lines to check them and reset the ones that had been sprung. Owen protested constantly, but his ankle kept him effectively imprisoned, and Adelaide proved more capable than even she had expected. Owen directed her from his enforced bed rest, telling her what to look for on the trap lines, how to judge if the wood was dry enough to burn, where to find the supplies she needed. Adelaide learned quickly, drawing on the weeks of working alongside him and on her own resourcefulness. In the evenings, she helped Owen hobble to the table for supper, and they talked by firelight. The enforced intimacy of their situation had stripped away the last of the polite distance they had maintained. They spoke freely now, laughing together, arguing occasionally about the best way to do something, settling into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. One night, as Adelaide was helping Owen back to bed, his hand caught hers and held it. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it? This arrangement, this employment situation. It is not enough anymore. I do not want you here as my employee. I want you here as my partner, as my wife, if you will have me." Adelaide stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" Owen's grip on her hand tightened. "I love you, Adelaide. I think I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing at your father's grave, so strong and proud despite everything. I love your determination, your kindness, your refusal to be defeated. I love working beside you and talking with you and just being in the same room with you. I know I do not have much to offer, just this cabin and a hard life in the mountains. But it is yours if you want it. I am yours if you want me." Adelaide felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "You think you do not have much to offer. Owen, you have given me everything. You have given me work and respect and a future when the whole town had written me off. You have seen me, really seen me, when everyone else only saw the poor girl with no prospects. You have made me feel valued and capable and loved. Of course I want you. I love you so much it terrifies me." Owen pulled her down to sit beside him on the bed, his hand coming up to cup her face. "You are sure? This life is not easy. The winters are hard, the work never ends, and we would be alone up here most of the time." "I have never been less alone than I am with you," Adelaide said, and I have never been happier than these past weeks, working beside you, building something together. Yes, I am sure. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it. Owen kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Adelaide felt like she was finally, truly home. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "We should do this properly," Owen said. "As soon as my ankle heals, we will go to town and get married by Reverend Mills. I want everyone to know you are my wife, that you are choosing this life freely." "Let them talk," Adelaide said, resting her head on his broad shoulder. "Let them say whatever they want. I am choosing you, and that is all that matters." They married 3 weeks later in Oroville's small church, with Mr. and Mrs. Chen as witnesses, and most of the town watching in barely concealed shock. Adelaide wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Owen insisted on buying, simple but well made, and she carried a bouquet of late autumn leaves and pine boughs. Owen wore new clothes as well, his long hair neatly tied back, his beard trimmed, looking every inch the strong, capable man he was. Reverend Mills conducted the ceremony with slightly puzzled approval, clearly trying to reconcile the rumors he had heard with the evidence of genuine affection before him. When Owen slipped a simple gold band on Adelaide's finger and kissed her in front of God and the whole town, Adelaide heard the whispers start, but she did not care. She was Adelaide Jameson now, and she had a husband who loved her and a future that was theirs to build together. The reception was minimal. The Chens had insisted on providing a small cake, and a few of the kinder townspeople offered congratulations, but most kept their distance, unsure what to make of this unexpected match. Mrs. Walsh was conspicuously silent, her face tight with disapproval, but Adelaide noticed she did not say a word. Owen's defense of Adelaide's reputation had had its intended effect. They left town in the afternoon, driving back up into the mountains as man and wife. The December day was cold but clear, the sky a brilliant blue above the snow-covered peaks. Adelaide sat close to Owen on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Are you happy?" Owen asked as the town disappeared behind them. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Adelaide replied honestly. "They all said I had no prospects, no future, but they were wrong. You saw my future clearly when no one else could, not even me." "I saw who you were," Owen corrected gently, "strong and capable and brave. I saw that you belonged here in these mountains, building a life with me. I saw it as clearly as I see these trees, as clearly as I know my own name. And now here I am," Adelaide said, smiling up at him. "Here we are," Owen agreed and kissed her temple. "Together always." Their first winter as husband and wife was hard but happy. The snow came early and stayed late, burying the mountains in white silence. Owen could not check his trap lines as often as he wanted, but Adelaide proved a capable partner, snowshoeing out with him when the weather allowed, learning to read the signs of the forest and help him with his work. Inside the cabin, they created a warm haven against the cold. Adelaide sewed and cooked, read aloud from Owen's small collection of books, and listened to him play the harmonica he had carved years ago. They made love with the tenderness of newlyweds and the passion of two people who had found something rare and precious. They talked deep into the night, making plans for the future, dreaming together of expanding their operation, of building a better cabin, of the children they hoped to have. When spring finally came, melting the snow and revealing the green world beneath, they emerged from their winter cocoon ready to work. Owen taught Adelaide more about trapping and tracking, and she proved to have a natural aptitude for it. Together, they expanded his trap lines, built a smokehouse for preserving meat, and cleared land for a larger garden. In May, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He pulled her into his lap, his large hands gentle on her still flat belly, and Adelaide saw tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Owen said, kissing her thoroughly. "You have given me everything, Adelaide. A home, a purpose, a future. And now this. I am the most blessed man alive." Their son was born in January of 1874, during a howling snowstorm that kept Owen pacing nervously while Mrs. Chen, who had agreed to come up from town to help with the birth, attended to Adelaide. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, with a thick head of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, Owen held him with shaking hands and cried openly. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked, exhausted but glowing. "After your father," Owen suggested tentatively. Adelaide shook her head. "No, this is a new beginning, not a continuation of the past. Let us name him something that means hope or future." They decided on Nathan, which meant gift from God, and both agreed it was perfect. Little Nathan Jameson was indeed a gift, healthy and strong-lunged and clearly determined to make his presence known. Owen proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size and strength, rocking his son for hours while Adelaide rested, singing old songs his own mother had taught him. As Nathan grew, the cabin grew with him. Owen built an addition, creating separate rooms and more space for their expanding family. Adelaide tended her garden and managed the household, while also continuing to help with the fur business during the busy seasons. They hired occasional help during the peak trapping months, young men from town who were willing to learn and work hard, and the operation flourished. Adelaide made peace with Oroville, visiting occasionally to trade and to let Nathan see other children, but her heart remained in the mountains. This was home now, this cabin Owen had built and expanded, these forests where she walked with her husband and their son, this life they had created together from nothing. When Nathan was 2, Adelaide became pregnant again, and this time their daughter arrived in the spring, when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows. They named her Sarah, after Owen's mother, and she was born with Adelaide's blonde hair and a disposition as sweet as sunshine. Owen doted on both his children equally, but there was something special about watching this strong, rough mountain man cradle his tiny daughter with infinite gentleness. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Nathan grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and trap and respect the wilderness. Sarah proved to have her mother's determination and her father's love of the mountains, climbing trees and catching fish with equal enthusiasm. Adelaide taught both children to read and write, using Owen's books and others they acquired on trips to town, determined that they would have opportunities she had never had. Owen built Adelaide a real house, larger and finer than the original cabin, with glass windows in every room and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. He made furniture with his own hands, sturdy and beautiful, and Adelaide filled the house with quilts she sewed and curtains she stitched, and all the small touches that made a house a home. They were not wealthy by town standards, but they were comfortable. Owen's furs commanded good prices, and Adelaide's management of their household and business meant they wasted nothing and always had enough. More importantly, they were happy, deeply and genuinely happy in a way that Adelaide had never imagined possible in those dark days after her father's death. In the summer of 1879, Owen and Adelaide took the children on a trip to Sacramento. partly for business and partly to show Nathan and Sarah something of the wider world. They stayed in a hotel, and Adelaide watched Owen navigate the city streets with visible discomfort, clearly eager to return to their mountains. On their last night, they stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunset, the children asleep inside. Adelaide leaned against Owen's solid warmth and thought about how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying me, taking on a family, giving up your solitary life?" Owen turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with the same gentleness he had shown from the beginning. "Adelaide, marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. You and the children are everything to me. That old solitary life was not living. It was just existing, waiting for something I did not even know I needed. You are what I needed. This family, this life we have built together, this is everything." "They said I had no prospects," Adelaide said softly. "The town was so sure I would amount to nothing, that I would end up desperate and dependent. And instead you became the strongest, most capable woman I have ever known. You built a business with me, raised 2 beautiful children, created a home in the wilderness. You proved them all wrong, Adelaide, not because you had to, but because that is who you are." Adelaide kissed him, tasting salt and knowing it was from her own tears. "You saw it, though. You saw what I could become, what I could do. You saw my future when no one else could, not even me." "I saw you," Owen said simply. "Just you, exactly as you were and as you could be, and I wanted to spend my life watching you become everything you were meant to be. I wanted that future beside you always. And here we are," Adelaide said, echoing the words from their wedding day. "Here we are," Owen agreed. "Together always, just like I knew we would be." They returned to the mountains the next day, all of them relieved to be heading home. As they climbed into the foothills and the air grew clearer and cooler, Adelaide saw Nathan and Sarah perk up, their faces bright with happiness to be returning to the only home they had really known. This was their legacy, she realized. Not wealth or status or the approval of people like Mrs. Walsh, but this wild, beautiful place and the knowledge that they belonged here, that they had built something real and lasting. Over the next decade, Adelaide and Owen's life continued its steady rhythm. Nathan grew into a young man who combined his father's strength and woodcraft with his mother's sharp mind and determination. He took over more and more of the trapping operation, expanding it in new directions and proving himself as capable as Owen had always been. Sarah grew into a spirited young woman who could ride and shoot as well as any man, but who also had her mother's skill with needle and thread, and her father's love of poetry and books. Adelaide and Owen aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Owen's dark hair went gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, still the mountain man who had seen Adelaide's future so clearly all those years ago. Adelaide's blonde hair silvered, and her hands bore the marks of years of hard work, but she moved through her life with confidence and contentment, secure in the knowledge that she had built something lasting. They added to their family as well. A third child, a daughter named Emma, arrived when Adelaide was 32, a surprise but a welcome one. And then, when Adelaide thought they were surely done, a fourth child, a son they named Thomas, born when she was 35 and Owen was 47. Both children were healthy and happy, growing up in the same wild freedom their older siblings had enjoyed. In 1890, Nathan married a girl from Oroville, a quiet, steady young woman named Mary who took to mountain life with surprising ease. They built a cabin near Adelaide and Owen's home, and Nathan continued working the trap lines while starting a family of his own. Adelaide became a grandmother at 45, holding Nathan's son with the same wonder she had felt holding her own babies. Sarah, independent and fierce, announced at 20 that she had no intention of marrying anytime soon, that she wanted to see more of the world first. Adelaide and Owen supported her decision, even when the town gossips clucked their tongues. Sarah went to San Francisco, worked as a seamstress, traveled to Oregon and Nevada, and finally returned to the mountains at 24 with a husband she had met in Sacramento, a doctor who was willing to set up practice in Oroville to be near his wife's family. The younger children, Emma and Thomas, were still at home, growing up in a household that now included regular visits from grandchildren, and the extended family that had grown around Adelaide and Owen's original union. The house that had started as a simple cabin now presided over a small compound of buildings, a thriving enterprise built on hard work and love. On their 20th wedding anniversary in December of 1893, Owen surprised Adelaide with a trip back to Oroville, not for business but purely for celebration. They left the younger children with Nathan and Mary and spent 3 days in town, staying at the hotel and acting like newlyweds. On the second evening, they attended a community dance, something Adelaide had not done since she was a girl. She wore a new dress Owen had commissioned from Sarah, deep blue silk that made her eyes sparkle, and Owen wore a proper suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. As they entered the hall, Adelaide saw Mrs. Walsh sitting with a group of other older women. The woman had aged poorly, her face set in permanent lines of disapproval, her eyes still sharp and judgmental. She looked up as Adelaide and Owen passed, and their eyes met. For a moment, Adelaide remembered being 18 and desperate, remembered standing in that lawyer's office hearing she had nothing, remembered Mrs. Walsh's prediction that she would end up in desperate straits. Then Owen's hand was warm and steady at her back, and she smiled at the older woman with genuine pity. "Mrs. Walsh," she said pleasantly, "how nice to see you." The woman sniffed. "Mrs. Jameson, I heard your daughter married a doctor. You must be very pleased." There was something in her tone that suggested surprise, as if Sarah's successful marriage was unexpected. Adelaide's smile widened. "I am pleased that Sarah is happy. That is all any parent can hope for. And your son runs your husband's business, I understand." "Nathan runs his own business," Owen corrected, his voice mild but firm. "He has expanded far beyond what I started. He is very successful." Mrs. Walsh's mouth tightened. "I suppose things turned out better than expected for you, Adelaide." "Better than you expected, certainly," Adelaide agreed. "But exactly as my husband expected. He always saw my future clearly, even when no one else could." She took Owen's arm, and they moved away to join the dancing. As Owen swept her into a waltz, Adelaide caught sight of her reflection in the hall's mirrors. She saw a woman in her prime, confident and loved, surrounded by family and respect earned through hard work and integrity. The girl with no prospects was long gone, replaced by a woman who had built a life beyond anything that town had imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, reading her expression. "That you were right," Adelaide said. "All those years ago you saw exactly who I could become. You saw my future, and it was beside you always." "Our future," Owen corrected, pulling her closer. "We built it together, Adelaide. Everything we have, everything we are, we made it together." The music swelled around them, and Adelaide rested her head against Owen's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the strength of his arms around her. This was what love looked like, she thought. Not the romance of storybooks, but this steady partnership, this daily choosing of each other, this building of something that would outlast them both. The years continued their steady march. Adelaide and Owen grew older but not old, still vital and active well into their 50s. They became great-grandparents as Nathan's children grew and married and started families of their own. The mountain compound expanded to accommodate 3 generations, a thriving community built on the foundation Adelaide and Owen had laid. Emma married a young logger and settled in town, but visited often with her growing family. Thomas, adventurous like his sister Sarah had been, went to work on the railroad before returning home at 25 with stories of the wider world and a renewed appreciation for the mountains. Through it all, Adelaide and Owen remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They worked side by side even as they aged, Owen still checking trap lines well into his 60s, Adelaide still managing the household and business with sharp efficiency. They had built an empire of sorts, not of wealth but of family and respect and love. In the spring of 1900, as the new century dawned, Adelaide and Owen celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with their entire family gathered around them. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the porch, 3 generations of Jamesons who existed, because Owen had seen a young woman's potential, and Adelaide had had the courage to reach for it. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed or returned to their own homes, Adelaide and Owen sat on the porch watching the stars come out over the mountains. They held hands, their fingers interlaced with the ease of decades of practice, and listened to the night sounds of the forest. "Do you remember the day we met?" Adelaide asked. "When you came to my cabin with your proposition?" "I remember being terrified you would say no," Owen admitted. "I had planned it for weeks, rehearsed what I would say, but when I actually saw you up on that roof, so determined and proud, I almost lost my nerve." "What made you go through with it?" "I thought about your mother, about the kindness she had shown me. And I thought about waste, about how wrong it would be to let someone with your strength and spirit be crushed by circumstances. I could not stand the idea of you struggling alone when I could help." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "You did more than help. You saved me, Owen. You gave me everything." "No," Owen said firmly, turning to look at her. Even in the darkness, his eyes were clear and certain. "You saved yourself, Adelaide. I just gave you an opportunity. You took it and turned it into all of this. You built this family, this life, with your own strength and determination. I have just been blessed to be part of it. We built it together," Adelaide insisted. "Everything good in my life came from saying yes to you that day, from choosing to trust you, to work beside you, to love you." Owen lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And I choose you every day. I chose you 27 years ago when I saw you at your father's funeral, standing so proud despite everything. I choose you now, sitting here with silver in your hair and a lifetime of memories between us. I will choose you tomorrow and every day after. You are my partner, my wife, my future. Always have been, always will be." Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "They said I had no prospects," she whispered. "They were so sure I would amount to nothing." "And look at us now," Owen said, gesturing to the house full of family, to the thriving compound, to the mountains they had made their own. "Look at what you built from those no prospects. You proved them all wrong, my love. You proved that the only future that matters is the one we make for ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted through decades and hardships and the simple wear of time. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been, desperate and alone, and the woman she had become, surrounded by love and family and the respect she had earned. Owen had seen her future clearly when she could not see past the next day. He had looked at her and seen not the poor girl with no prospects, but a partner, a wife, a mother, a woman who would stand beside him and build something lasting. And she had looked at him and seen not just a mountain man offering charity, but someone who saw her true self, who valued her for exactly who she was. Together, they had created a life richer than any Adelaide had imagined possible. They had raised children who were strong and capable and kind. They had built a business that provided for 3 generations. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard, through all the small moments that made up a marriage. As they finally rose to go inside, Adelaide paused to look out at the mountains one last time, at the wild country that had become her home. She had been born in Oroville, grown up in the shadow of these peaks, but she had only truly come alive here in these mountains, with this man beside her. "Thank you," she said softly. Owen looked at her questioningly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For seeing my future when no one else could, for knowing it was beside you always." Owen pulled her close, wrapping her in his strong arms. "Thank you for choosing me. For saying yes to a rough mountain man with more hope than sense. For building this life with me, for giving me a family, for making every day worth living. I love you, Adelaide Jameson. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you forever." Adelaide tilted her face up for his kiss, tasting love and commitment and the sweetness of a promise kept. Whatever the town had said about her prospects all those years ago, they had been spectacularly wrong. She had prospects beyond measure, a future beyond imagining, and it had been beside Owen Jameson, always, just as he had known it would be from the very beginning. They walked into their home together, hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it as they had faced everything else for 27 years. Together, always in the mountains they loved, with the family they had built and the love that had sustained them through it all. The story of the girl with no prospects had become the story of a woman who had everything that mattered. And it had all started with a mountain man who saw her clearly, who offered her honest work and respect, and who stayed beside her through every season of their lives, loving her completely, exactly as she was and exactly as she would become. In the end, that was the greatest prospect of all.